The Open University of Hong Kong recently held an international conference on ethics, responsible business, and sustainable development. In the following seminar, Professor Richard Welford, chairman of CSR Asia, gives a talk on how and why sustainability is important for businesses. Businesses must concentrate on what they are really good at and make a contribution by developing a sustainability strategy. Professor Welford gives examples of companies that follow a sustainable strategy and make a profit. He says that we must be committed to creating change for sustainable development, or there will be serious consequences.
And really what I wanted to talk about today was how businesses ought to be interested in sustainability and how they are increasingly becoming interested in sustainability. But also I want to talk a little bit about how I think academia ought to be better interacting with the private sector around issues associated with sustainability. So I want to sort of base my talk on three propositions. One is to say that the business case for sustainability is now overwhelming. Secondly, to talk about successful sustainability strategies as I see them in the private sector, increasingly revolving around innovation and thinking about not just sustainability as a topic, but actually how you run your business in a fundamentally different way to accommodate the demands of sustainable development. And thirdly, I want to say a little bit about the future and how I see the role of the private sector going forward. But let me start with the business case for sustainability. The business case for sustainability is now completely overwhelming. The trouble is that a lot of the private sector doesn't understand that overwhelming case because they don't talk to academics. And academics operating in the sustainability field can now cite something like 400 papers in refereed academic journals that shows some sort of positive link between sustainability performance and financial performance. So the business case has been made. There should be no debate whatsoever. And any chief executive that's not thinking about sustainability is either stupid or just downright lazy, because we have overwhelming evidence to suggest that financial performance is improved by sustainability because of things like decreased costs, increased revenue, price premiums, particularly on the environmental side, massive increases in efficiency and productivity, supply chain efficiencies and resilience, new products and services driven by the sustainability agenda, the ability to recruit and retain the best talent, differentiation and competitive positioning. Now, that being the case, one has to scratch your head to understand why so many businesses are not really thinking about sustainability sufficiently. And I think there needs to be a much better discourse between all those researchers, some of you are in the room, who are studying sustainability, and the private sector to make the business case for sustainability. One of the things that I've been working on an awful lot recently is the link between sustainability and shared value. And one of the things I've been saying to businesses, increasingly in the future, you will have to have a purpose and a vision for your business. And one of the things I say to chief executives all the time is that if you don't have a social purpose, I actually don't think you will exist in the long run. And that social purpose needs to be linked to sustainability, and your vision for the future needs to be linked to the way you do business, the products and services that you produce, the whole of your value chains, including strategies for inclusive business, local economic development, your positioning around the environment and climate change, and the work you do around advocacy. And I think never before has there been a need for the private sector to be out there advocating change around sustainability. We are being failed by governments across the world when it comes to sustainable development, and particularly when it comes to climate change. You know, the overwhelming evidence that has been out there just this week following the conference on sustainability in Poland, the overwhelming evidence around the fact that climate change is now happening cannot be refuted, but some presidents continue to refute it, unfortunately. And I would love to see the private sector step up to fill that gap that exists in many countries between what we understand and the actions that we're taking. There's little doubt that we will not meet the Paris targets. And although we're clinging on to some hope that maybe we can change things in the next 10 years, that means that we will keep temperature rises below 2 degrees centigrade, that is highly unlikely. And some recent studies suggest that temperature rises by the end of this century will be more like 4 or 5%. And that will lead to sea level rises of between 3 and 4 meters, which will have a devastating impact on countries like Hong Kong. So one of the things that I talk to business a lot about is sort of building a sustainability strategy with many of these challenges in mind. And again, that sustainability strategy needs to start with a vision and a purpose for business. And I want businesses to tell me what their purpose is. And if they think their purpose is simply maximizing profits and maximizing shareholder returns, well, I don't mind about that, but just tell me. Because if you really do think running a business is only about profits, then I think many of us won't want to do business with you. And many of us won't want to buy your products and services, and many of us might not even want to supply you with our services in the future. So I think it's very important that business start to embrace sustainability, see a role that they have to play in sustainability, and build a strategy. And that strategy needs to be looking very carefully at how your business impacts on sustainability. What are the social impacts you have? What are the environmental impacts that you have? And you need to think about your sustainability strategy as aligned to core business. See, I don't want businesses to do everything. I want businesses to actually concentrate on what they're really, really good at and make a contribution by having a really focused approach to developing a sustainability strategy. And that means setting yourself ambitious goals and targets that you commit to over a certain time scale. And I want the private sector to commit to using the assets and expertise that they have to making a change in society that we desperately need going forward. And that includes putting organizational structures in place within the organization to deliver sustainability. And I've come to realize that that does not mean having a sustainability department. Too many businesses look like this. They have a huge business, and then they have a little sustainability department on the side of the business. And that is not a strategy that actually is working. We need to drag sustainability into business planning. We need to drag sustainability into core business and get companies to realize that there are real benefits in developing a sustainability strategy going forward. And that's inevitably going to involve some interesting partnerships. Partnerships with NGOs, partnerships with other businesses, partnerships with governments in some cases, but definitely partnerships with the academic community. And this is the one thing that I really feel is lacking. Many businesses are not talking to academics. Many academics are not talking to businesses. And I think we're missing out on a huge opportunity here to share our experiences and share our knowledge. Last but not least, businesses need to be able to track their performance. Measuring your performance to sustainability is something that businesses are really bad at. And this is where they could have a lot of help from people like yourselves, where you could come in to help businesses learn from their successes, learn from their failures, look at other successful businesses, and try and sort of bring successful sustainability efforts to scale. Last but not least, we need to be out there communicating sustainability and advocating for change, not through 100-page CSR reports that nobody reads, but through having strategic communications through channels that people do use, in particular the social media. As I said before, my view is that innovation is the core of sustainability. And it's all well and good talking about sustainability being made up of environmental issues and social issues and governance issues and economic issues and climate change and poverty alleviation. That's fine, but the way you approach sustainability from a business perspective needs to be looking at the way you actually run your business and looking at how you begin to change your business to not only accommodate sustainability, but to promote sustainability in the future. So again, for me, the whole focus of innovation needs to be starting again with this purpose and this vision that you have for sustainability in the future. And that social purpose needs to become part of your competitive positioning. It needs to be part of the DNA of business. It needs to be part of your brand and your reputation. Secondly, your innovation should focus on very specific social environmental needs that you as a business can actually engage with. I see too many businesses using a scattergun approach to sustainability, meaning they want to try and fix everything. Well, that's stupid. That's not strategic. Businesses should focus on those elements of sustainability where they have the assets and the expertise actually to create a change. And none of that change is actually going to happen without being able to measure that change. And so when I'm talking to businesses, I put a lot of emphasis on the need to continually measure your sustainability performance and not only the impact that this has on your business, but also the impact that it has on society. I think innovation is often helped by co-creation, by synergies between partners, sometimes other business partners, sometimes NGOs, sometimes academia, sometimes government. But I've come to see that 1 + 1 sometimes does equal 3, when partners come together and find solutions around sustainability. And last but not least, for innovation to thrive, you need structures in place that organize for innovation and encourage creativity and experimentation that leads to innovation. The problem we have in so many businesses, particularly I think here in Asia, is that we have structures that actually stifle innovation, not structures that actually encourage innovation. Because one of the things that we'd never tolerate in Asian businesses is making mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, you never try anything new. So the best way not to make a mistake is not to do anything different. And actually, that goes completely against the philosophy of sustainability that I have, which is that we will only achieve sustainability if we do things differently. If we don't continue to do things differently, then we are headed for complete chaos. And I think that's something that has been talked about this week following the conference in Poland. So I want to give you a couple of examples which are my take on innovative approaches to doing business in a way that supports sustainability, and particularly things like the Sustainable Development Goals, which I am pleased to say that the private sector is beginning to get excited about. Here's a company that I've worked with a little bit called Visionspring. Visionspring makes eyeglasses without you needing to go to the optician. So this is not really meant for you and I, because we can afford expensive eyeglasses. This is meant for poor people who cannot afford these expensive eyeglasses, $100 or $200 US, and are perhaps living on $3 or $4 US a day, but would benefit hugely from having improved eyesight. So what Visionspring has done is develop some eyeglasses which are adjustable. You can see the wheels on the side of the eyeglasses, which actually move two plastic lenses across each other, so that you actually adjust the glasses. They're never going to be as perfect as this, but they're good enough for you to be able to work, for you to be able to read, for children to do homework, attend school, see the blackboard, those sorts of things. Now, the amazing thing about these eyeglasses is they only cost $6 US. So people living on $3 a day can afford them. It's 2 days' wages. So you can afford to buy these for yourself and even share them with other members of your family. And the interesting thing about these glasses is they sell for $6 US, but they are made for just $2 US. Now, there are 700 million people in the world who would benefit from eyeglasses, And there's a $4 margin to be made on these eyeglasses. And so there is a profitable business opportunity here that Visionspring is now exploiting and is now developing this profitable business opportunity for people at the base of the pyramid, contributing to things like Sustainable Development Goal number 3. Let me turn to China, and one of the most innovative companies I think we have seen grow over the last 10 years. Many of you will know BYD, becoming one of the world's largest producers of cars and buses and lorries. But their buses in particular have really become the leading bus when it comes to environmental action. Half of the world's pollution actually comes from transportation. And this Chinese company has now developed this bus, which is lasting a whole day on one charge. It's now selling 10,000 buses a year in China and is about to open a new factory in California because it's one of the few bus makers that can actually meet Californian laws around sustainability. You will know if you live here in this region that BYD is an incredibly successful company and an incredibly profitable company. But the whole basis of their profitability is linked to a sustainability strategy, which talks about sustainable transport and contributions to climate action and sustainable cities and sustainable communities. Here in Hong Kong, we have one of the largest makers of garments in the world. Some of you will know the Crystal Group that actually makes 300 million items of clothing in their factories in China, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, supplying some of the biggest brands of the world. Crystal Group also has a hugely impressive sustainability strategy. They've worked on water issues, decreasing water consumption by 30% per garment. They've massively reduced chemical usage in their dyes, and that has had a huge environmental impact. But Crystal Group also realizes that there's a lot they need to do for their workers. Garment factories are 70 to 80% women. Many of those women are under 30 years old. And so Crystal has taken a real interest in working with women around things like sexual and reproductive education, planning for families in the future, providing women with leadership skills and other health aspects. What this has led to, and you can look at this in their sustainability report that just came out last month, what this has led to is massive cost savings. Reductions in water bills, reductions in chemical bills, reductions in staff turnover. In China, the average turnover of staff in a garment factory is about 10% every month. That's 100% a year, more, is the turnover in a garment factory in China. Crystal has got that turnover down to 10% a year. And there's a huge cost saving by investing in your workers, in women, and providing them with the sort of health and education that they need. And let me turn to Singapore. Olam is one of the largest agricultural businesses in Asia now. It started out as a cashew nut trader, but now has enormous amounts of supply chains around the world. They have this thing called the Olam Livelihood Charter, which is a manifesto for increased investments in smallholder growers. They work with farmers on productivity, they work with farmers on quality issues, increasing the incomes for those farmers, and increasing the resilience of their own supply chains as well. Olam does not suffer from the same amount of crop failures as other big buyers of foodstuffs do, because they are investing in their farmers, working with up to 345,000 farmers now across Asia, Africa, and South America. Olam also has guaranteed minimum prices. So they are not completely driven by fluctuating commodity costs. They guarantee their farmers a minimum price for their produce, even if commodity prices actually fall. Olam's profits have been increasing year on year on year. And as they invest further in supply chain resilience, they've come to realize that this is simply good for business, But it's also really, really good for those farmers, many of whom are very small holders and are not rich people at all, but it's great for those farmers as well. If you look at those cases, I think there are some lessons learned that cut across all of those cases. Firstly, in each case, sustainability has driven profits. And again, I go back to the comment that I made earlier. There is overwhelming evidence that sustainability will lead to increased profits. Not in the next 3 months, but over time, we know that there is a positive correlation between sustainability performance and financial performance. Secondly, I've chosen those cases because they all revolve around innovation. They all take a sustainability challenge and think about how I can deal with that sustainability challenge in an innovative way, whether that's working on productivity, whether that's developing new environmentally sensitive buses, whether that's helping with people's health care through eyeglasses, for example. But what is clear is that we need to operate at scale. And that's what many of these businesses can do. Visionspring seeks to reach out to 700 million people. Olam works with 345,000 farmers. BYD will very soon be the largest bus company in the world. And it's companies that can act at scale, often in a multinational type of way, that are going to really make a change. What is absolutely critical, and is contained in all of these cases, is that we measure progress. You know, the old saying about you cannot manage it if you can't measure it happens to be true. And these companies have all put a lot of time and resources into understanding the impacts they're having. Because unless you measure your contribution to sustainability, how can you actually say you're having a positive impact? And far too many companies that I see think that they're having a positive impact, but actually probably don't. I see an awful lot of volunteering efforts amongst companies in Hong Kong that are actually pretty meaningless and are little more than team-building exercises. They really don't have much of a positive impact in actual fact. And the last thing I want to say about all these cases is they're all about creating change. They're all about delivering improvements. They're about delivering improvements in the lives of people. And in all of these cases, these businesses have a vision for the change that they want to create. And that leads me on really to my last point, which is the future, I think, is about the power of business. We should try and embrace the power of business to create change. And it's interesting, I think, that amongst some of the leading companies of the world, the debate has moved beyond just sustainability. And the debate in many organizations, including people like Nestle and Unilever now, is very much about social innovation and asking ourselves some really fundamental questions about what is the purpose of business? What is the purpose of business beyond simply making a profit? And I think corporate social innovation is a buzzword that we're going to hear an awful lot more about in the future. And I think we're going to be asking ourselves exactly how does the private sector actually contribute to change? Change for the better, changing people's lives, changing the environment, dealing with the worst effect of climate change. And so corporate social innovation to me is all about finding new ways in which I can create value for my business, profits, and that's certainly fine. I think profits can be a driver of that change, but also realizing that there has to be a role of business, particularly big business, in actually creating change for the better, in actually creating more sustainable societies, more equitable societies, one in which men and women are valued equally. So this is part of, I think, competitiveness in the future. And I see in the future that social innovation, as much as sustainability, will become embedded within leading companies' business strategies as well. There are 4 very important elements to corporate social innovation that we'll be looking at in the future. One is creating value. creating value for a business in a way that also creates value for society. The concept of shared value that I talked about earlier, I think is going to be a huge driver for business in the future. Secondly, social innovation has to have an impact. You know, we really do need to be able to create change and understand the impact that we actually can have. And I believe that market forces are an important element in driving change, in driving impact. Each of those 4 examples I just gave you very briefly are about companies existing within the market, using the market to actually leverage positive impact. Thirdly, business can't do this alone. Businesses need to work with other businesses, sometimes competitors. They need to work with civil society organizations. They sometimes need to work with governments, depending on who those governments are. And they certainly need to be working with people like you in the academic community. Because I think partnerships, particularly multi-stakeholder partnerships that go beyond the one-to-one to the one-to-many, are something that we will actually see more and more of in the future. And last but not least, I think businesses need to be committed to change. We actually have no choice but to change. We simply cannot go on as we are at the moment. Otherwise, there's a very high likelihood that you and I, well, not you and I, but future generations simply will not be on this planet. The data that is now coming out around climate change, just climate change, is really, really worrying. We are at the top end of all the predictions that we were making 10 years ago. And the situation is likely to get worse. So unless we are committed to creating change around sustainable development, I think the consequences are really quite dire. But on an optimistic note, I see the private sector as being able to drive that change. And one of the reasons that I work with the private sector so much is I do believe businesses, and particularly big businesses, can create change. I believe that they actually want to create change, and I believe in the long run that they will create change. And it's the private sector to which I'm looking to with a lot of enthusiasm rather than government or civil society organizations, because I believe it's only the private sector that has the scale and the reach to actually create the change that we need in society. Thank you very much.